Hello, friends. So today it's Christmas Day where I'm at. You can see by the lovely Christmas tree that we have on the side. And as every year, I take a few minutes, really took me probably an hour total max, to review my finances and see what has gone down, where my income has come from, where my expenses were. And this year, I've actually prepared a lovely presentation that I have right on my screen here. And we're going to dive right into this. Hopefully, you find this helpful. Shameless plug, I am running a few one-on-one personal finance coaching sessions. So if you're interested at all in, setting up for 2026 in the best way and preparing to work towards your financial goals in the best way possible, then I'm going to drop my Calendly link below. You can book like a free discovery call with myself. And yeah, that's about it. So let's go into the money wrapped video that I prepared for this year. So here we have my money in review, reflecting on my financial journey for 2025. Here we go. So financial snapshot, monthly breakdown, what my biggest expense was, my best purchase, regrets, financial wins, money lessons, and then next year's goals. It's been very useful to reflect on a few areas that I haven't before necessarily. So the biggest expenses or the biggest purchases and what the regrets also have been. I hadn't really included these. I've tended to focus on mainly numbers in the past reviews that I've done. So this is something that I would highly recommend you including if it's something that you also haven't been thinking about in past reviews. But without further ado, so financial snapshot, where my money came from. 81% of my money actually came from my 9 to 5 job. It's no surprise. 8% from my Florence Airbnb rental that I have, which is interesting, and it's the first year. 2025 was the first year where I've had a full, a calendar year of income from the flat. And it's been interesting to see how much money we've been able to make from that, but also in terms of profit, how much. Spoiler alert, we actually broke even pretty much to the T. So, for me, it's as long as that's the case, I'm happy. I don't need to be making necessarily too much of a profit at this moment in time, but I'm happy for the rent to kind of pay for the mortgage and the house itself. And then 10 point something percent came from my performance bonus. I receive it yearly since becoming vice president. I don't receive it on a monthly or quarterly basis anymore. So I got a chunk of cash in February of 2025, and that was pretty much it. Now, more interestingly, where my money went, 32%, and I first bucketed in essential, non-essentials, loans, and savings and investments. But I purposely decided to count my savings and investments as expenses rather than separate from them, because it really gives me a sense of the balance that I achieved by the end of the year, and if I had any money left over at all to play with. So 32% came from, or rather went to essentials. So what I consider essential is my Florence apartment, rent payments, for example. My Florence apartment, mortgage payments, my rent on my house in London, and then anything kind of like bills, utilities, groceries, transportation. Pretty much that's about it, I would say. Non-essentials is, well, the fun bits, some would say. So going out for lunch, for dinner, entertainment, tickets, gifts, anything of the sort. And I will include a link to my budgeting tracker where I include all my different categories, and then you can go ahead and customize them based on your spending categories. Then loans, for me, that was student loans, although that does disappear at some point in the year, spoiler alert. And then my mortgage on the Florence property that I own, and then savings and investments that includes a variety of things. We're going to go into that in a second. I'm very happy for savings and investments to have been 30.5% of my outgoings, and also for my essentials to have stayed at 32%. Now, of course, if I put together essential and non-essentials, we arrive at 54, 50, almost 55% of my income going to that. It is a bit higher than I would like it to be, but roughly and broadly speaking, I'm still happy with the allocation of the money. But I think next year I want to try for it combined to be at 50%. Now, breaking down the expenses even more, so essentials, unsurprisingly, 61% was on rent. I live in London, I live alone in London, so that was not a surprise at all for me. Council tax, utilities at 5%. I think none of this is particularly surprising, really. The extra category is a bit odd. I think next year I want to try and name it a little bit better, or also maybe not count it towards the essentials, because yeah, the way that I've been allocating to that bucket is very ad hoc and kind of scattered. So I want to reflect a little bit more on that. Transport 6.5 is actually very painful. Yeah, the tube in London is quite expensive. I've taken quite a few Ubers in the past year as well, I would say, which I don't regret, but it definitely adds up. So, conscious to try and reduce that if at all possible. And then non-essentials travel, 53%, basically. Again, not a surprise. I travel loads and I'm going to spend a bit more time on that in a second. So not going to talk about that too much, but yeah, I'm not surprised, and I spend significantly more than in other years on travel. Eating out is the second biggest expense, non-essential expense, with almost 15%. That includes both lunches and things like these during a workday, as well as more expensive, fancier dinners and things like these. So again, no surprise. Probably want to carve that down a little bit, although I don't think I've done that too extravagantly. So fairly happy overall with the amount of money spent on eating out. And then, yes, clothes, beauty, and well-being treatments, things like these, I think all under control. Gifts is significantly higher than last year, almost 8%. I think it's also because I've included a few gifts to myself in that category this year. So that includes the unplugged cabin retreat that I went to in December. That was £500, and yeah, that went into the gift category. So that definitely inflated the overall spending category quite significantly. But yeah, overall, something that I was quite surprised by. And then further into the loans, again, majority was the Florence mortgage that I have. And then student loan, 41.5%. And yeah, again, pretty much not surprised. I'm very happy that these are the two lines of loan that I have at the moment and not anything else. And then savings. So vast majority went into my stocks ISA. I use Trading 212. I've now started using Invest Engine as well. If you would like me to break these two down and compare Invest Engine and Trading 212, do let me know. We'll be very happy to do that. I've got some thoughts on both. Then I do have a cash ISA, which makes up 5% of my savings and investments for 2025. My workplace pension is 11%, which yeah, I've started contributing more than the employer match this year to decrease my taxable income. So I think that's also why that went up in terms of proportionate contribution to the overall. And crypto. I've started reinvesting in crypto more aggressively, I would say, this year, after not really being in the market for a while. This is mainly because I started reading more into it. I listened to Raoul Pal's podcast and Real Vision kind of like commentary. And yeah, I think right now I've allocated roughly like 7-8% of my net worth into crypto. I'm fairly comfortable staying at that level. I don't plan on broadly, increasing that. But yeah, so that's why it makes up a significantly bigger proportion than it did in previous years. Now, this is my monthly breakdown of, the lighter blue shade is the income that I've had, and then all the other layers of color on top of them are the four spending categories, including again the investments and savings. Again, some people like to differentiate those and like separate those. I've just chosen to bucket them, but up to you. As you can see, broadly stayed within the remit of like what I receive, what I earned is what I spent, apart from February and March, where of course I've had more on the investment side because I received my bonus, and so it looks a bit disproportionate and unbalanced in those months. But broadly speaking, I managed to stay within the limits of and the remits of what I was making. That's what I spent and invested, so no debt. This was very interesting, and you see a lot of red going on here. So these are the categories that have increased compared to 2024. And again, I'm not massively surprised. I think there are some categories. I like to do this to basically sum up all the expenses into what the per year amount is that I spent, and then just divide that by 12. And so that kind of gives me my average per month spent on each given category. And that helps me when I then do the third step, which is to set up my budget for the next year. In 2026, I kind of have a template that has my ideal spending split across these categories, and it's broadly modeled on what the actual amount that I spent in previous year is. Now, it's not to the T. Like, for example, travel. On average per month, I spent £941, which is a lot. Of course, it's insane actually when you put it like that. But doesn't mean that now every month I'm budgeting for almost £1,000 spent on travel, right? So I kind of adjust that. But that's why sinking funds, for example, help massively, because if I know that, last year I spent this amount of money, maybe I also don't want to spend as much money like in the coming year, right? So it would be a conscious choice to only allocate, let's say, £600 per month into that sinking fund dedicated to travel. And then when the time comes, I have that ready to go. Now, disclaimer, I don't really do that as much for travel specifically, because I find that it's kind of a concentrated spend, and it tends to happen for me in the beginning of the year rather than equally spread, because I tend to go on holidays, like bigger holidays, around April, when we have Easter break, or early summer, around that time. So if I had the sinking fund starting in January, I wouldn't actually be able to build up enough of it for the travels that I need. So I kind of do that more ad hoc. But I think that reasoning is still very important for things like, for example, gifts, that tends actually to come towards the end of the year anyways, because you have your biggest spending seasons, let's say, unless you have some bigger um, birthdays and weddings, perhaps. So this is something that I actually want to start doing more in the coming year. And yeah, in general, though, commenting on what went up and what went down. So the only ones that actually went down, and more significantly so, are the grocery category. Are the grocery category, with minus 20% year over year, and the entertainment category, which I brought down almost by a quarter. Well, I mean, by a quarter, 25%, which I'm quite pleased with. I didn't do that consciously, to be honest. Like, I didn't set out to diminish that spending. It just kind of happened naturally. So yeah, but I think, for example, for the groceries, they went down, but then my eating out spending went up by a little bit more even than that. So that kind of like counterbalances. I think it makes sense because I still had to eat somewhere, right? So that makes sense to me. And then apart from that, as you can see, the a few well-being, for example, went up, but I'm not surprised because I invested actually in a quite expensive skincare treatment in this past year, which cost me, that alone was £600, I think. So a little bit less than half what the total for the year was. So that makes sense. I'm not worried about that. And then clothing, that's probably something that I would like to bring down, because I don't like to spend like over £100 per month on clothing. So going into 2026, that's a category that I'll try to consciously bring down and be more conscious of. And then I mean, travel again, as I mentioned, was the biggest, the one that kind of ballooned the most. But also, I have no regrets, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, because the biggest travel expense was indeed travel, with £11,291 spent in 2025. However, I have no regrets at all. I managed to visit 5 new countries in 2 different continents, and I visited, I think, 13 I put there. I think it might even be more. I missed a few smaller trips, but I went to, let's call it, 13 countries in total for 2025. So that's a lot of traveling, and I think that put me, based on some software that I used to kind of do like a travel wrapped, that put me in the top 1% of travelers in my kind of demographic. So definitely a year where I spent a lot of time traveling around. It's never not going to be worth it for me. So yeah, I think I feel pretty good about this. Now, I can still try and spend a little bit less in the coming year, right? Doesn't mean that it only tends to go up, right? But in general, it's been incredible experiences, especially my trip that I did in Southeast Asia. I went to Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand. That was amazing. And then I went to South America, Central America, I went to Peru for Machu Picchu. That was also incredible, right? So these trips are gonna stay with me for a lifetime. And actually, in 2026, I want to travel to 5 new countries and ideally take off 2 more wonders of the world. So let's see. I say that I'm gonna spend less, but probably I'm gonna spend more. Let's see. Best purchase that I made though was towards the end of this year, and I actually invested in a life coaching program for £1,797. Now, steep price tag for sure, but it's something that I've already, because I think also it's quite expensive, I'm already very invested into the program, and I'm already seeing a lot of actions being taken. Also, me restarting this YouTube channel is very much linked to that as well, and the one-on-one coaching that I'm now starting to offer is also very tightly related to me starting this program. So it's something that it's a great reminder that investing in yourself, in your upskilling, your development is always going to have a positive and very big ROI anyways. And actually that also includes therapy. I restarted therapy around July, I want to say, of this year. And yeah, now I go weekly. It's great. I always look forward to it. So it's fantastic for me to be reminded of that. Now, regrets on the flip side of that, don't have massive ones to be fair, and luckily they're not um, luckily they're not in a lot of money spent. But my Longchamp bags, I basically they include these like impulsive materialistic purchases. One of them is bags that I thought were of a certain brand. Turns out they were not of this brand. Unsurprisingly, really, because the offer just sounded too good to be true, and in fact, it was not true. So reminder for me as well that I can also be scammed online, even though you think that these things don't happen to you. They can happen to you and they will happen to you. And then this expensive champagne, I put it as more like as a signifier of any time that I've spent money on bougie expensive things to impress people that I actually didn't even like that much. And that happened in a particular phase of 2025 where I was hanging out with a crowd that I didn't really like, and I kind of found myself in because of various reasons. And yeah, it's just a reminder that it's not worth it, right? Like, you spend a lot of time making your hard-earned money. Don't spend it on people that are like not great people, for lack of a better word. Be more conscious about that. I think now that I was presenting, I'm actually thinking about the down payment on a property that I thought I was going to buy, and then actually didn't end up buying, in the north of England. But actually, so I mean, technically that happened in 2024, so maybe that's also why I didn't think about it when I was making this video. But also, it's not really a regret, because yes, I wasted, let's say, 3 grand, which is a lot, right? Definitely, by any means. But it was a great lesson for me, because again, it reminded me that it's and I'm gonna talk about that in a second, but it reminded me that sometimes losing or wasting money, in order to not tie yourself down to something that is not going to serve you, is better than actually just going ahead with a purchase for the sunken cost fallacy, for not wanting to waste the money that you've already put down, but actually something that kind of ties you into an investment that maybe you don't want to make. You realize it's not good for you. So that's why I didn't include it. But more on that in a second. In terms of financial wins, we had quite a few, and I think the first one is definitely paying off student loans, as I mentioned before. I managed to do that in September of this year, and yeah, it was great. I'd been paying that since graduating from my bachelor's from the University of Manchester, and I feel incredibly fortunate and lucky that I was able to pay that all down completely, in like roughly 5 years into my job. So that's great. That was a big milestone. I also hit £150,000 in net worth. This again, it's a number that I just seemed so big. I've always felt very big, and I don't want to say unattainable, unachievable, but like very far away, let's say, to say the least. And now not counting my rental property, so not the value of it, neither the mortgage, I have a net worth upwards of £150,000, which is amazing. And I also critically rebalanced my portfolio and reminded myself that simple is better than overcomplicating things, especially when it comes to long-term planning for your finances. Yes, you can try to optimize, and you can try to, you know, diversify and design the most well thought out portfolio you can. But ultimately, and you know, there's many proofs of that, no one's going to beat the market. So sometimes the best thing you can do is just investing in as broad of an index, as broad of a market index as you can. So an all world equities market, for example, and just hold it forever and call it a day. So that's kind of like what I had to realize after reading, you know, 5 more books on finance, etc. And money lessons. I'm not going to talk about the second one because that's exactly what I mentioned earlier. So, you know, sometimes it's better to lose money than to tie yourself in bad investments. The first one is also important. So, you will be familiar with the 50-30-20 budgeting rule, but I give it a twist. And so, the way I interpret it is 50% on essentials, 30% of investments, which is exactly how much I ended up investing overall in the year, which is great, and then 20% on the fun bits instead of the other way around. So people normally say that you should allocate 30% on the fun expenses and then 20% on investments. I actually wanted to reverse that and swap that, and I was able to do that in the year. So definitely want to continue doing that in 2026. And yeah, the third is really what I was mentioning in the last financial win, rediscovering and realizing once again that simple is better and that less is more. And you're not going to beat the market. And yes, you can try and have fun with a portion of your portfolio in that, but ultimately don't overcomplicate things just for mediocre results at best. Now, on to next year, and I can do a separate video on this, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but overall, I want to reach 200K in net worth. I think it's very doable. Hopefully, fingers crossed, the market continues to help me in that and work in my favor. But yes, this is one big headline goal that I want to achieve. The biggest one for me, though, is setting up and starting to have a new income stream from my coaching business and ideally YouTube as well. That would be amazing. But this for me is more like a passion, really, to, you know, kind of share my knowledge and talk to you guys. But yeah, so mainly doubling down on my coaching business, on my one-on-one, and setting a price that I feel comfortable with and that I think really does justice to the value that I can bring to my clients. And yeah, starting to earn an income from that, that would be fantastic. And then also my pension and taxes optimization plan. As I mentioned before, I've been contributing up to my employer's match for the longest time. And then in 2025, I started investing a little bit more because I wanted to stay below my taxable income, the 100K. Now, in 2026, I want to do that even better, thinking about potentially setting up a SIP, so a single individual pension plan. And yeah, I'm playing around with that. So not just my workplace pension, which is, I did my best to optimize it and invest in things that I believe in, but it's still very much more expensive than if I did it myself. So yeah, more on that in the new year. And last but not least, my words of wisdom and something that I've realized is that as long as you are getting the big things right, don't worry about getting the small things wrong. And it's something that very much applies to finance and what I was saying before in terms of not overcomplicating and things like these, but also applies to life. Honestly, as long as you're putting the right amount of thought on the big, more important decisions, you will make some decisions that are wrong, you know, there's more things, but you can afford to do that because you have the foundations and the bigger rocks in place and going in the right direction and working for you. So yeah, this was me. Hopefully you found this video interesting. If you would like, I can share this template with you guys, like a sanitized version, and so you can fill that out as well. And until next time, see you.